what the Church of Scientology is so afraid of.
This is SPTV.
Welcome back, Mike Brown.
Thanks for having me on.
Guys, if you're not already subscribed to Mike Brown's channel, jump over there, Mike Brown, at Mike Brown 101. And he puts up a lot of great stuff. So, Mike, we wanted to do a little chat today, a little bit of a follow-up to the video I did yesterday about the Delphi School in Los Angeles. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff today, but just to begin, what are some of the points that you wanted to make on this?
Well, I see, anyway, thanks for having me back, but I see three main areas where Scientology cannot hide from the crimes that they're doing. And I think there's irrefutable problems with what exists there. It's with regard to elder abuse, which is a large component of what my channel is, sharing my mother's story. There's child abuse, and then there's labor trafficking. And I think the labor trafficking, you could then also almost apply to the first two as well, with both seniors and children. The seniors and children being the most vulnerable portion of our population, and the one that Scientology takes advantage of, either to work to death or to get people in when they're still very young and impressionable to then become part of their Sea Org workforce. And even probably in the class 5 organizations, the lower level organizations that are delivering Scientology, which is where you found yourself before you joined the Sea Org. So I think that those are kind of the three areas that I think Scientology needs to be held accountable. But with regard to your video that you did last night talking about Delphi and the abuse that has been going on there and was covered up and exposed, I thought two things are very interesting and need kind of to be elaborated on or just highlighted. One, Delphi Academy is one of the primary recruiting pools for Scientology's Sea organization. These are the second and third generation Scientologists and people that they send their kids to this boarding schools, and they then are approached often by Sea Org recruiters in terms of what are they going to do when they graduate. And a lot of people came from Delphi. And then another thing that I thought was interesting with respect to the administrator, like the headmistress or the principal for Delphi, doing that puff piece about David Miscavige. On how wonderful David Miscavige is. So this is supposed to be a high-level educator for a private school. David Miscavige is a high school dropout, as are a lot of us that ended up in Scientology in this organization. So here you have this educator that's trying to get people to come to her school, who's doing this POW video for this cult leader who has never finished school. It's just like that when you marry the things up together, you're like, this doesn't even make any sense. So I thought that was at best humorous, and I couldn't help but say something about it, because every time why miss an opportunity to trash David Miscavige? I mean, it's anyway.
It is, you can tell he never went to school when you read the dispatches that he writes.
I tried to read
his handwriting.
Because I had seen a lot of these things, because I was in a position where I was actually like supposed to enforce his orders and run around and get compliance on them. So I saw a lot of handwritten stuff, and you kind of get used to like the doctor's crappy handwriting kind of thing. That thing was illegible. It was so bad. And any pharmacist that would receive that in terms of an order for a patient, if they were trying to fill a script, they'd just have to reject it. I mean, that's how bad it was. And I don't know, maybe it was in like Sanskrit or some like ancient language, but I couldn't read it. It was bad.
If anyone's wondering what we're talking about, on the community tab of my YouTube channel yesterday, I posted a dispatch that Mike Rinder had sent to David Miscavige, and David Miscavige wrote a handwritten response on it. It is completely illegible. All day, and I posted it so that people could give me their best guess on the deciphering or translation of it. All day I've been getting emails from people with from former Sea Org members who know the lingo, who know, what it might be likely to say. And it's hilarious. You can't read it.
This might be a good use for AI to be able to like actually translate that and to turn it into like a usable dispatch or response. It might only be able, like maybe a supercomputer can crack it, but I don't think the human brain can. Anyway.
So you wanted to talk a little bit about your story and how you ended up in Scientology in the Sea Org.
I did. I've covered minor parts about my story, but in terms of kind of laying it all out there on my early childhood and how I ended up in Scientology, we use these terms like second generation Scientologists, and different people have different opinions about the terminology we should use. But basically, the long and the short of it is those of us who were either brought in as children or were born into Scientology, or whose children were, or whose parents were, born into Scientology, we're at a unique disadvantage in that we're brought into a situation that we never decided to be there for ourselves. And I would say that and I'm just estimating this, the attrition rate on those of us who were born into Scientology, when we actually grow up to a point where we're in our mid to late 20s, our brains have fully developed, we start jumping off the iceberg as fast as possible. Sometimes a little bit later, but when we actually kind of come to our senses and, endure the abuse for long enough, we all end up out for the most part. Maybe 90%, 95% of us are out of there. I've a lot of what I'm going to go over, and I'm sorry if I seem a little bit anxious about it. This is a lot to kind of talk about and go over, but I don't think I was able to fully appreciate my situation from the point of when I was a child until I had kids. My kids are now, my youngest ones are about 8 years old. I have twins, and my oldest she's about 11. And when the youngest kids at 8, that's 7, 8 years old, that's when my parents kind of got into Scientology. And then my oldest child now, that's when I was brought to the Sea Organization. So it's reflecting back on that now. I think when we think of ourselves when we're younger, I kind of had this picture in my mind that I wasn't nearly as young as I actually was. And now that I have kids and have very much decided to make sure that they are not going to have the kind of upbringing I had, it's terrifying to me. It is super scary to think that I was in a situation that, like, I would never put my kids in the situation that I found myself in. And then when I start reflecting back on my early childhood, there's a lot of emotions that have been buried and repressed that I've never been able to talk about with anyone. When I left, I kind of reinvented my life, and I'm around no kind of Scientology. I'm like, I live in Pennsylvania. I am far, far away from anything that is remotely close to Scientology. And as such, all of my Scientology friends are, a phone call away or something, but it's not like you pick up and you talk to your friends about your early childhood. But as I reflected on these, it's been hard. And I think it's important that I share these, if only to elaborate on just another one of the many methodologies that have been used to get kids into this cult, and then the results of some of those things, and how we find ourselves there. So we'll see. Hopefully it isn't too clunky as we go through this.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when you say you look back on, when you remember your own youth, you think of yourself as being older at those times than you actually were. And I go, I was 15 years old when I finished my training at Flag and was fired back to be full-time staff member at Philadelphia Day Foundation combined orgs. And when I think back to that age, I think of myself as a grown-up. I think of myself as a full-grown adult. And I was 15. My oldest daughter right now is 17. And I still think of her as a kid because she is a kid. 17-year-olds are kids.
She deserves to be a kid, and so did we, and we weren't allowed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. So just to kind of frame this and not to get too long-winded, but just a little synopsis. So my mother grew up in a very large family. She was a Catholic, and they were not very well off. They were immigrants from what was Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, and they came, to the United States looking for a better life, and very Appalachia, not very well off at all. Very big family, and the kids were kind of fend for yourselves kind of way that a lot of our parents probably were raised at that time. But by the time she got involved with my father, she was just out of high school, probably 18 years old. She had never been involved with anyone before. Didn't have a boyfriend before. And my father was a very dominating personality, at first very charismatic, I'll just say up front that he is a malignant narcissist, but as such, these people are they easily kind of draw you in, and then once they have you under their control, they control you very, very closely. So she ended up getting involved with him, but when I think about it, and when I've talked to her about it, because she has a lot of guilt from these things too, I'm thinking, Mom, you were, again, 17, 18 years old. That's about the age that your daughter is, Aaron, now. Like, that's when she got involved with this guy, and then ended up living with him for 21 years. My father, former Vietnam vet, and I would say kind of stereotypical in that he came back from Vietnam wounded with a lot of mental trauma. And that did not help probably the way his state of mind was before he went. And it just got worse after that. So as their marriage kind of went on, he was controlling. She wasn't able to really think or do anything for herself. And he was always looking for self-help methodologies to try to help his anger issues and things of this nature. After they were married for about 10 years, I was born. My mother didn't think she could have kids, but she was very happy to have me. And my father didn't actually want children. So it was kind of off weird in terms of the relationship from day one. So as such, when I was very, very young, a lot of this I don't have memory of, but the way children are treated when we're very young actually establishes the way we then interact with the environment as we get older. There's a lot of psychology textbooks that talk about this, the importance of a nurturing family life when you're young. It was an abusive household. I don't really want to get into the details of it, but safe to say that I needn't have my father around my children. But this is how things were the entire time that I was growing up. Lots of yelling and fighting, screaming in the home. I have a lot of feelings very young of a lot of fear. And at some point around when I was about 7 years old, it was probably about 1983, my father got involved in Scientology, and he very much clicked with all of Hubbard's writings and teachings. And I think it kind of, they're kind of a similar kind of personality in that they're very grandiose, kind of larger than life when they're in a group, but behind the scenes, very controlling and narcissistic. And he very much loved that. And he drug my mother into it, and they all got involved with the local Scientology small organization, which is referred to as a mission. It's kind of works under a larger organization in the Denver area. It's the Denver Mission. So in this location, it was actually being staffed by a lady named the mission holder was Martha Wells, and her husband and Beckett Wells he was a guy that I ended up working with at Golden Air Productions.
I know Beckett.
He was about 14 years old when I was about 7 or 8. And I knew him.
His
from
parents
Denver.
ran the mission that your parents got on lines at.
Yeah, Martha and Rex Wells. Martha ended up joining the Sea Organization and worked under Guillaume Lasserve in Exexstrata. And later my mother would do the same thing. So when the family is then all going down and now interfacing with Scientology, the thing about Scientology is you are always there and you're always working there. You're always coming in and you have to show up all the time. It's one of these things of the constant control. So as opposed to family weekends or playing with my friends, now all the time was spent down at this mission as my parents are getting services there. So I was put on communications courses and as a child, doing the TRs, the training routines. This is when you sit in front of another person and stare at them for a while. And then it gets up to this thing called bull bait, which is kind of learning to sit there and not react as somebody is verbally abusing you. So I can remember at the age of 7, this is the first interaction I have, aside from profanities my father might have yelled at some point, of profanity directed at me. And then also things of a sexual nature being directed at me. So the person that's bull baiting you is an adult, like a male that's then talking to me about sexual situations to get me to react. And if you react flunk, you're not supposed to react. So it almost indoctrinates you as a kid to endure that type of treatment. And that's what my first interactions with Scientology were. I also got some auditing. which was, I think they refer to it as a life repair. I'm 7 years old. I don't know what they were fixing exactly. And they gave me this thing called the INT rundown. I don't know
At
why I
7?
got it at 7. Well, it's because when I
Oh
got
my
life
God.
repair, I had this kind of like blown out feeling, like just euphoric. And they're like, oh, he probably went exterior, meaning left your body and had, you know, an external viewing of your body or something. So they put me through that. So around this same time that I was going through these things and starting to receive the Scientology auditing at a young age, because it's all very introspective. It's like you're being asked questions about things that are very, you know, make you think inside of your head. And as a kid, I just remember it being very confusing. I started having night terrors around this same time. And I would wake up just absolutely terrified, not understanding what was going on. And my parents would come in, and it was hard for them to calm me down to get me back to sleep. This was happening for weeks and weeks and weeks and months. And since while I was getting this auditing. So the auditing stops at some point, but then my father at night, when my mother would be working down at the organization or there doing services, he would decide to put me on the e-meter and continue to try to audit me on what it was I was having nightmares about, to get me to recall past lives and all this sort of stuff. As a 7 or 8 year old kid, it was very disorienting and I hated it.
Wow.
So Scientology in general would view that sort of behavior as squirreling, meaning you're altering their technology. You're not allowed to practice Scientology in that way, but he was doing that. He thought that he could fix it. He would always tell stories like him and Hubbard were friends in a past life, and he remembered this and that. It was, as a kid, you're sitting here listening to this, and you know, I don't know. Tell me if this is your experience as a kid. You put your parents up on a pedestal. You kind of create this picture in your mind about your parents probably being better than they deserve, because that adds a layer of safety as you, for you as a child. Like you can say like, hey, my parents are great in these ways, because it helps reinforce the safety that I wasn't otherwise getting. And I was very much doing that. So, anyway, the next kind of memories I have, my father then kind of gets involved with another woman. Aside from my mother, apparently through their entire 20-year marriage, he was consistently kind of, you know, sleeping around outside of the marriage. And my mother would keep taking him back. You know, she was kind of in this abusive relationship. I've asked her many times, like, Mom, why would you not leave this guy? I'm not going to use colorful explicatives that I want to, but and
So you became aware of this because your mother was aware of it.
Well, this was at the point where I wasn't aware of it before this, but he was having these relationships, and now he was deciding he was going to divorce my mother and move in with this other woman. So it was now an existential crisis in the family. So later, more recently, my mother and I, Rosemary, we've had a chance to actually talk and discuss a lot of these things, which has been a real gift to be able to process it all. And I've been able to ask her a lot of hard questions, and she's been able to explain to me a lot of things that I was never able to piece together. So a lot of this comes now from a point of, you know, being informed, being able to piece together other things in my childhood that were just confusing memories and stuff that have actually kind of come together like a bunch of Legos. So when all this is happening, like now our life is falling apart. And at this point, my father had gotten involved in Scientology, and my parents were supposed to be going and doing they have a marriage repair thing that they'll offer to people that are having trouble. It's an auditing process where you audit the two couples, that both the male and the female couple there. They have an auditor, and the person is in there. It's kind of a Scientology confessional, but with the other spouse supposed to be in the room. He refused to do that. They paid for it, but they never got, you know, and then he was just like, hey, I'm going to divorce you. I'm going to leave. So more or less, he left she and I, and my mother was very depressed at the time. Now a single mom. He was sort of like off, you know, doing his thing, and would kind of have, they were in the process of trying to get a divorce. And now she's plugged in with Scientology with a very rudimentary understanding. All she had gotten was kind of Scientology auditing up till now. She had not really done a lot of the reading part of it. And she was still under the impression it was kind of like a church group. So now she's in a very vulnerable spot, working kind of part-time for this organization while she has the other job to raise her, you know, 9-year-old son. And then to the Denver org where she was working. This is, kind of, we went from the mission later, then she went to the higher level organization there in Denver, and that's where she was working as a part-time staff member. And a recruiting mission came from Los Angeles, from the C organization, their upper level clergy, I guess you'd call them. And it was staffed by a gentleman named Richard Dunley, who's now out of Scientology, and another guy who was his second on the mission. And what they were trying to do is recruit people. When the Sea Organization wants to do something, they call it a mission, and they wear their Sea Org uniforms and they roll out, they go and they do a thing. This one was, the idea was to recruit people for the Commodore's Messenger organization in Los Angeles. Prior to all of this, when my family was still together, they had tried to recruit my father, because he's big into computer science and artificial intelligence early on, to become a member of INCOM, which is their computer management. And this was back when my parents were still together. We had taken a trip out to California, kind of looked at what is the Los Angeles base there in Hollywood. And it was just as much of a piece of crap then as it was when we ended up moving out a couple years later. But he ended up not joining at that time. And, kind of life went on. So sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. So this recruiting tour comes to Denver, and they want to talk to my mother. And again, she's in a very, she's not sure what to do with her life. She wants to make sure her son grows up in a wholesome environment. She's scared that, I'm just going to have a horrible upbringing. So she wants to get involved in a church group.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
At that time in Denver, are you in a public school, or are you in some sort of Scientology private school?
I was still in a public school. We lived in Golden, Colorado. I was in a public school, Fairmont Elementary School. And that's where I had done all of my schooling. Now, it's worth mentioning, when I was a child, I was very dyslexic. I was struggling. The at-home situation probably wasn't helping, but I was struggling academically very, very much. So I was in the 5th grade around this time that all this was happening, but I was probably behind in school. I was one of the kids that have to leave the room to go and do the special education thing with trying to, learn phonics and all this sort of stuff. I was the dumb kid. So that was, that in itself was hard. Plus all this other things happening. No one really worked with me when I was a kid. Like now that we have children, we're like involved on the day-to-day, like, how was school? What are you doing? Let me see your homework, sit down, do this stuff. Like this like interaction that exists with our children never existed with me. Not to say that I wouldn't have still had those same struggles, but I very, very much did at the time. And this is going to be important to see how this plugs in when we go to California. So long and the short of it is, my mother gets recruited. And during this time, she kind of thought that she was joining a church group. And what the picture in her mind was a little bit more like a Christian church group or something that would be similar to that, even though she knew it was Scientology. But she had a different picture in her mind about what that was. When they come and do the recruiting, they're also showing up in their Sea Org uniforms. It all looks very official. And I remember being brought in and being shown all this paper, all these, flyers and stuff, and being asked if I would like to join the Sea Organization. And my mother's like, I'm going to be doing this, Michael. Are you going to come with me, or are you going to? So I was recruited when I was that old to be in the Sea Org, 9 years old. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was used to seeing military propaganda, and that was a normal kind of thing in my household because my father was a retired Marine officer. So for me, I saw the Navy. It looked like something that I was getting into. It seemed legitimate. They use a lot of the symbology that they tie in with the armed forces recruiting for the Sea Organization. And as a young kid that was into, Knight Rider and G.I. Joe and MacGyver and the A-Team, that sounded great to me. So, and it also, like, what am I going to do? Not go with my father? Or sorry, not go with my mother and end up living with my father?
Can I tell a 20-second anecdote real quick here?
Please, I need a break to drink some
In one
water.
of the Scientology films, when Miscavige was having them redone and re-released for the first golden age of tech, in the beginning of one of the films was an advertisement for joining staff. And it started out by showing a kid drowning in a lake and a mom freaking out and a guy like hearing what's happening and running and diving in to save this kid. And it's like, if someone was drowning, would you help? And then it showed this thing. And then it goes, what if it was a whole planet?
I
And it was
remember
like
this
boom,
campaign.
boom. And it showed the Earth. And I remember seeing that as the first time because we were all watching this film as staff members.
Mhm.
And I remember watching this thing like, oh my God, we are amazing. We are so great. We're salvaging the whole planet. Like that. I mean, you sort of reminded me of that because you equated it to cool kind of the honor that the button of honor and service and duty that would come into play in the promoting the military. And even though Sea Org members don't think of themselves as military, they very much think of themselves as the saviors of this sector of the galaxy.
Right. They very much do. And the fanaticism and the dedication, and the refusal to cooperate with anyone outside of your organization that poses a threat to your organization is probably as strong or stronger than it would be for somebody that was a POW being captured by enemies. That, like, the mindset of a Sea Org member, if you were, like, for instance, and the kind of going back to the video yesterday where you're talking about the Delphi Academy and all this stuff that happens and why Sea Org members and Scientologists refuse to cooperate with the armed forces. This contract that I was getting to sign as a child, a billion-year contract. People's like, I didn't even know what a billion years was as a kid. That's true and not true. I knew that I was dedicating myself unconditionally to an organization that dedication was more important than my physical life. If you think about the way that is, I'm going to dedicate myself for millions of years, meaning I know that these bodies they're kind of perishable. They keep breathing oxygen. Apparently that kills them after a while and you die after like 70, 80 years. Who would have thunk it? So that whole process of like, I'm going to do this for a billion years. If you think about it, there's a level of fanaticism built into that says, what we are doing long term is more important than whatever happens right now. And that's the mindset when you sign that contract of like, this little thing that went wrong, if we look at the end game and the long game on what's happening, that's what's important. And that's when these people that sign these contracts, that is the mindset. So going back to my POW analogy, if you were captured by enemy forces and they were trying to get you to like, hey, disavow, part of membership in this group, and you knew that those people were wrong in the way that they were thinking and you didn't want to be a part of that, you would lie, you would keep to yourself, you would not interact with them in order to save face for what you think you need to do. So it almost feels like that. It's almost that level of indoctrination is akin to like North Korea and like massive regimes that are very, very abusive. It's the same mindset of people that are very, very indoctrinated. So that's how I feel about that contract. That's probably a long-winded example of it, but I really think that that's the mindset of the hardcore Sea Org member on why they do what they do.
Yeah.
So
it's true. It's so true.
Yeah. So at this point, my parents are finishing up their divorce, getting all of the paperwork and stuff done, like, and figuring out what the custody is going to be of me. My mother got 100%. My father was happy to make sure that that happened. I had visitation that I was supposed to go and visit him 2 weeks a year, and that was about it. And he then paid child support on a monthly basis to my mother. So we kind of we had very much a kind of a middle-class existence. I had a dog and a couple cats. I had like toys and things of this nature. We got rid of everything except for what would fit in about a trunk and a couple suitcases and moved to Los Angeles. We were expecting to, Leah kind of talks about this in her book, what it was like to arrive as a kid. She went to Flag, I went to LA. And when you arrive, you're like expecting that you're going to arrive and you're going to be received and kind of like, kind of moved into this elite organization. And no one was there to pick us up at the airport. It took forever. Like we finally were able to get from the airport to this location in Hollywood. It was a complete and total shithole. Like it was the living conditions there. And they're not much better from what my mother tells me in terms of where the staff members actually live. They're very dilapidated, very, overcrowded. They don't have, good sanitary conditions, and it's just like that. Like their staff aren't well taken care of. We arrived in this, and moving from, kind of rural, it wasn't really rural, but it was very much the suburbs in Colorado to now downtown LA and Hollywood, where it's traffic. I'd never seen a cockroach before, but there's more than one of them in that freaking building. They're like if there's 100 or 10,000 Sea Org members, and there's probably, I don't know what, in the pack base, probably 3,000, maybe.
Oh, like living in main building?
No, in that whole pack area.
Well, by pack, does that include CC and HGB?
Sure. Maybe 3,000.
Like, yeah, three. I mean, today it's probably less than 1,000, I think.
Yeah. But so there's easily, like probably 500 roaches per staff member is kind of the point. If the place is a total dump. That's why these numbers are important, Aaron. Sorry, I kind of
the roaches are everywhere. Thank God when I was in the Sea Org, I didn't see any mice or rats. Thank God, because I would have been out of there. But the roaches are, full-time residents.
Full-time residents. And they also have those big ones, the palmetto bugs.
Yeah, they fly too.
They fly, and they fly at you. And and they're so gross. Anyway, so we arrive there, and once we arrive, my mother has to start what's called the Estates Project Force, which is the Sea Organizations boot camp. It consists of 4 or 5 courses where you listen to Hubbard and read all of his stuff and drone on and on about it. She was a very green, meaning new Scientologist. She did not know very much of this, so it took her a while to get through that whole program.
It must have taken her months as a brand new Scientologist.
It was about 3.5 or 4 months. Yeah.
Wow.
Because she had to go, all the study tech courses and the ethics course and the Welcome to the Sea Organization course and those lectures. And anyway, so it took her a while. So in that time, I was actually living with another family. I was put into the Cadet organization, which was it was referred to as the ATA, which is the Apollo Training Academy. It's right next to it, kind of across from where George's General Store is, right there on Fountain Avenue.
Right.
You know where the old bridge building was? I don't know if it's still there. Across the street, it's like this little courtyard area. I think they now just do painting projects and stuff in there. That was where all the kids were all day long. That was the Apollo Training Academy. You would all be in there, and it was like a concrete front yard with a fence around it. And I'm like a 10-year-old arriving, just plopped into this. And my mother, there was no my mother taking me there. She dropped me off with this other family, and I lived with this family on the floor in their apartment on a mattress on the floor until my mother got done with EPF.
Oh, so you weren't even yourself staying in Sea Org berthing?
I was. So I was staying with the person that was in charge of the Cadet organization, Yolanda Avila. And Jorge, who he and I are still friends, he was the commanding officer for the Cadet organization. He was probably 14 or 15 years old at the time.
I think Jorge might be someone that I've been trying to connect with recently.
Yeah,
has he mentioned
he's in the chat sometimes. He hasn't. We kind of, kind of keep up.
We've been trying to connect. We've been trying to connect.
He has very interesting stories. He ended up as one of the security guards at the international base. So he has probably a lot. I'd be interested at some point if he would share his story. He would have a lot to say.
Real quick, for those who are familiar with the base buildings, were you staying in the main building or the AB or the HI?
So when my mother,
what's the name of the test center? What's the name of the test center on Hollywood Boulevard? Is that the HI?
That's the HI. So when my mother was that's a Hollywood Inn. When my mother was in the EPF, I was staying in the Fountain building, which was right next to the complex, or sorry, the parking garage.
Yes.
So this was before they renovated it. It was gross. It was absolutely disgusting. I remember while I would be sleeping, I would have cockroaches like crawling on me. Yeah. And as a kid, I don't like bugs and stuff. Like that was horrible. Excuse me. So arriving again, I'm arriving now in this very strange situation, being kind of just plopped in here. Like I was now a cadet. Okay, you're now a cadet. You signed your Sea Org contract. You're there, and I was made what they refer to as an expediter. And what that was, the majority of the cadets would stay as they would call us either expediters or missionaries. And what we would then be required to do is we would go and do odd jobs around the Scientology organizations. Like, for instance, one organization could say, hey, I need a bunch of stuff cleaned out, or I need filing done, or I need something done of this nature. And they would have the kids come and do that work. And then out of the financial planning of these organizations, they would give money for the kids so that you have things like toilet paper and food and things. So we would be earning our keep while we were there doing the work. Just kind of thinking about that. We're being indoctrinated to work for this organization, to keep our exchange in and all that from a very, very young age. I came from a very loose affiliation with Scientology in Colorado to being thrown into a cadet organization. The change in vernacular was confusing as you can possibly imagine. Just all of the different lingo I had to learn overnight. Like somebody would tell me something, and if I would just say, okay, I would get yelled at because I didn't say sir. And then you're calling sir to both male and female. And then if I didn't understand that, I would be yelled at to get my FO38 in. And I was just like, I didn't understand any of this shit. Like, what is going on? And then the solution for education was I was put on the basic study manual. So here's a kid who's dyslexic that needs special education and needs to be worked with an actual like education professional to get me to properly read and write. And I was not good at it. And I was put on the basic study manual, and it probably took me 8 months to get through the basic study manual, just sitting there in these course rooms. Like, this is the thing. It's self-paced. Scientology's like, yeah, it's all self-paced. And the Delphi Academy, it's self-paced, and your kid can progress. Well, if your kid's struggling, they're just going to struggle at their own pace. And that's where I found myself. I wasn't doing any school. I wasn't getting any education. I was just doing the Hubbard, like, this is how you study stuff. And I have very strong feelings about what absolute bullshit the study technology is, except I do think that there is value in defining words, but I think the level of complexity that is added to words and the whole obsession with, if you have this misunderstood word, you can't function after this thing, and it's the whole reason why the world is crappy is because you didn't understand a word in a sentence. Like, they have this whole spiral that they'll go on to about that, and this is what I was being indoctrinated to do, and I was stuck in this place. So I made some friends as a kid. This is when I started to become friends with some people in LA. At first, I met Sterling, I met Justin, a guy that actually used to be my very best friend before I ended up going up to the International Ranch, is a guy by the name of Ben Schulman. Ben Schulman and I were inseparable.
Yes, not Ben Monahan, Ben Schulman. I got to check myself.
So Ben Schulman is now like one of Danny Masterson's like crew. That's like, he's in the whole scene with that. And when we were kids, when I was like between 10 and 13 years old, he and I were inseparable.
Wow.
So my mother,
I never met Ben Schulman until we went to the Danny Masterson sentencing, but I worked with his mother, Amy, at AOLA. Yeah.
So strange. He ended up, I think, out of the C organization because he was taking care of his brother, Nicky, who had behavioral problems at best. That's probably the best way to say it.
Hold on. Didn't Ben or Nicky, wasn't Nicky involved with the Sergio Belinsky thing?
I believe so, yeah.
And that's why Nicky needed to be looked after, right? Or
problem.
Okay. Okay. Keep going.
Well, one thing about Nicky is Nicky's one of these kids that kind of had a violent tendencies. He was not well adjusted to be able to be in that environment, and as such, he would get in a lot of fights. So Ben would constantly be, and he had a hair trigger, like, and when he would go off, he would be very, very, like, he would just physically explode. So, anyway, I had this whole friends group that I had down in LA, but once my mother finished this estates project for us, we did move, and we were staying in the area on Hollywood Boulevard, the HI, where the test center is. That was an even bigger piece of crap than the first place where I was living. And we were in this little like apartment that had like a twin bed for she and I, and it had no bathroom in it. And I can just remember there was no air conditioning. It was disgusting. But we would bus there and back every single day, and that's how we got to and from this location. at a certain point, my mother, she's now working in the marketing unit. She ends up kind of moving up to the international base after her boss, Ronnie Miscavige, she was working for him, got moved up there as well, and she was his secretary. So she goes up to this international base, and I stay in LA. This is after I had been there. We had been there for about 3 years. At one point, she was getting the Hollywood Inn was such a piece of crap. She was getting this money from my father for child support, so she rented one of those apartments that's directly across from the American Saint Hill organization. You know, those little like there right as you walk out the door to Asho, there's like little apartments straight across the street. There's like a pink building or something. The one on the bottom floor, that was where we lived for a while. For about 8 months, she rented that place so we would have a place to live. And we stayed there until she went up to the international base, which is in a secret location, not to be confused with Gilman Hot Springs, California, right outside of Hemet and San Jacinto, if anyone's interested in looking. So she goes there. I don't know where she physically is. And I am now plopped in with another family to live in their living room yet again, but now I'm 13 years old.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
At that time, how did they explain to you why your mom was being sent away, but you weren't allowed to go with her?
So at the international base, there are no children allowed on it. So at the LA base and at the like the base in Clearwater at this time, I don't know how it is now. I think they've kind of gotten rid of the whole children thing with the cadets and all that, because who would have thunk that it would have created a bunch of problems like the ones I'm telling you about right now. But the at the international base, it's just the upper level management and Golden Arrow Productions that are there, and there are no children that are allowed to be there, except for a couple minor allowances. I think Hubbard's granddaughter Roanne was there, and I'm pretty sure Casavius was there. Casavius Tabioyan, his father Andre was Hubbard's driver. So aside from like some people that were kind of connected directly to the Hubbard family, there were not children allowed at that property. So when she was going up there that was a reason. And then also we were told as children, you have not been cleared, like authorized and received the security clearances to go to the international base. So we're talking about children. Like, what do they think we're like? We have some sort of state secrets or something? Like we have like we've been like running guns. Like, I'm not sure what they thought we needed to be cleared for, but that was the two reasons.
That's so funny. Until you just said that, it had never crossed my mind that if you're dealing with a child, what is the point of clearances? That never even crossed my mind.
Well, this is the thing, like all of these people, if you think there's insanity built into all of this sort of stuff. You literally have people, they are so, after the whole FBI raid that happened and with the Guardian's office back in the day and people ended up going to prison, they got super paranoid. And they were always scared in the Sea organization about people infiltrating, like the government's going to infiltrate us to find out what we're really up to, which then begs you to wonder, like, well, why are you scared about that? Like, if you're scared about it, usually people are scared of something because there's a reason to be scared. And anyway, so the paranoia is because they know they have issues. But they kind of get everyone in the mindset of like, these government agencies and things of this nature are trying to find out what we're doing because they are against us helping the people of the earth. So the people there think like the cops are bad, the FBI is bad, public, officials are bad, and we need to control that narrative, and we can't trust any of them, and they could be trying to infiltrate our organization, even if they're children. This is the level of like thought modification that occurs in that group. And now I've been living there about 3.5 years, with the annual exception of going and visiting my father for 2 weeks, which he would then be fun dad, and we'd go and take a camping trip and do something cool, and then he would send me back to the shithole that I live in LA. Like, hey, see you next year, kind of shit. Like, it was good to see you, Dad.
So check this person's asking, and it's interesting that we're talking about this property because later this evening or tomorrow, I'm going to do an interview with this guy whose Twitter handle is called like a Film the Police LA, and he goes outside the Hollywood Inn, the test center. And he stands outside when they're handing out the flyers to try to bring people in. He's like, don't go in. It's a cult. Don't go in. It's a cult. They just want your money. Don't go in. And it's a cult.
It's
so
perfect.
Jill, Jill's asking, is the HI the building on Hollywood and Highland? The answer is yes. What's the question with the huge avocado tree in the driveway? Was there an avocado tree there?
So I can't remember, but I do think they had the big parking lot right there. That's where they would do the Winter Wonderland, right? That they would do every year. So what they do is it's all again, trying to safe point the local public and government agencies. They create this whole Winter Wonderland right outside of this Hollywood Inn. Meanwhile, like this is where their staff sleep upstairs and it's a total dump. But they create this whole thing with Santa Claus and all this, like, you know, the Rudolph stuff and this whole big elaborate thing to do like goodwill to the public. And they've been doing that, but I think they do it in the parking lot next to the Hollywood Inn, the HI there. Yeah, it's one of the many wonders that they work on.
By the way, guys, on both of our channels combined, we got about 1,600 people watching right now. Do us a favor and hit that like button. It seems to help with notifications, is the word on the street. Okay, so let's pick it up. I interrupted you there a moment ago. So we were talking about why your mom was being sent away and you had to stay. So then what happened after that?
So there was so I wasn't the only child in this situation. There were, I think, out of all of the staff members that were up at this base, this international base, where Golden Air Productions and International Management was, there was just short of probably 90 children who were living in Los Angeles while their parents were up at this base. So this was not unique to me. It wasn't unique to Taryn and Benjamin Render. It wasn't unique to Justin and Sterling and Jenna. It wasn't unique to, and then there's dozens and dozens and dozens of us kids that are down living with other families because our parents are at this secret property that's a good 2-hour drive away from where we are in LA. We would only see them on the weekends. They would get off late Saturday night. They'd come down and spend their, what is referred to as their clean ship program. They give their people Sunday morning off for church, which really means you're going to have that time to do your laundry and clean your stuff, and before you have to go back to work on Sunday at noon. That way it gives the perception of like, hey, we take the morning off on Sundays. You know, it's kind of this whole tie-in with what other churches do. But the international management parents would come down on that Sunday morning, and that's the only time during the week that we would see our parents for a couple hours in the morning, and then they had to do a 2-hour drive back to that property to be there by like 12 or 12:30. So you got a couple hours either in the evening or in the morning with your parents, and they're commuting big time in order to be there. And a lot of kids, many kids, did not have their parents even come and visit them. Like they would be like, hey, I'll maybe see you like once a month or something like that. And so Rosemary did a very good job of coming at least once a week to see me, as did the Renders for the most part. I think Kathy probably more than Mike, because Mike's always doing his OSA shit at the time. But the Miscaviges also tried to see Jenna and the kids. And that was kind of what our weeks were like. I remember a couple times, like when I was a kid, and we would just be there, and then our caretakers or the other family, we'd have to just go back to them. I remember Ronnie and Biddy leaving, and Justin and I were off on the side, and Jenna was probably 5 or 6 years old, maybe 6 or 7 max. And she was, there was underneath the parking garage, this is over on Edgemont, the gate started to, like, as he was going out, the gate starts to open and she's riding on this gate. And she's just this little girl riding on the gate. You know, it's kind of fun. But as the gate, it's like running right up against a block wall. And one of her knees was through the bar, and it pinned her leg against the wrought iron and the wall, and it jammed the gate in there. And like she was screaming. And anyway, and then Ronnie jumped out. He goes and runs over there, and like, you know, dad on adrenaline, he like pulls open the bars and pulls her out of there. It like fractured her leg. Anyway, this was a particular shitty event that happened, but this is like every week when our parents leave, it's like that honeymoon phase of you get your parents for a couple hours and then they leave again. And that's just one particular memory that always sits in my mind, because Justin and I are like trying to run around to try to help and push the gate back. And anyway, it sucked. But the point being, aside from like that particular event being what it is, every week when they would leave, they would then be gone again, and it would just be like, my parents are gone, or my mother's gone. And then you kind of go back to your normal routine of doing whatever you do in LA, working at the Cadet organization. But because you had such a short amount of time with your parents, if you had problems or issues or things that you needed to talk to them about, it's just, you have such a little bit of time and you're not supposed to, make problems for your parents. And it's all just a short amount of time. You don't want to waste it. So there's never any open space to be able to say, hey, mom, I'm not happy here, or I don't like it here. Or, we're never being checked on what we're doing educationally. It was just like kind of free range kids then until next week. So eventually, there were a couple of security events that happened in LA. I think that there were some local shootings that happened that were unrelated to Scientology. And Biddy at the time said, hey, we're going to create this international ranch for the kids, and we're going to move all the kids up there, and we need to get this thing renovated, and got some authorization to do that. So myself, and when this all got approved, I got some notes over here just so I can kind of keep up with my timeline. So this is in probably spring to, so around March 1989 is when we ended up going up to this property. And it was it was, I think, 3 or 4 adults and 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls that were chosen. We were around 13 years old. And we weren't necessarily chosen because our parents were the highest ranking, although for Justin, that was true because Ronnie and Biddy were pretty high ranking. Taryn was one of them as well. Mike Render and Kathy were high ranking. But some of us others were just sort of like, our parents were kind of mid-level, either assistants or executives. But all of us kids were around 13 or 14 years old. And we were old enough where we could be gotten to do renovations. So we were brought up to that property primarily to fix it up for the other kids to come up. So we were used as the workforce in order to get rooms completed. And as rooms completed, more kids would come up. And this was kind of the process that occurred for the better part of the next 1.5 to 2 years, was the focus on renovations. It was, looking back at the time, leaving LA, and Sterling and I talk about this a little bit. It was so much better than being in LA. But what we were never doing was like a normal educational curriculum or anything for children. Like if we ever did study, it would just be Hubbard study. So here again, the kind of imposter syndrome that I have about, kind of growing up and being now an educated person, is at the time, I'm still the same kid that was struggling in the 5th grade when I was 10 years old, and is now 13, 14, 15 years old. Still haven't progressed any further along in my formal education than when my mother brought me out to California. So around the age of 15 is when some of we had gotten a lot of the renovations and stuff done there. I would still do the thing where I would visit my father for a couple weekends a year, or like 2 weeks 2 weeks annually. And everything's going pretty good. But the other kids that are my age, Sterling, Mike Norton, I think Justin, a few other kids, they were starting to be graduated, which is just a fancy word saying, hey, we're not going to have you at this ranch anymore. They were gotten through these interrogations and moved to the international base. Even when we were up there at this ranch, which is 15-minute drive away from where the international property is, we were not allowed to go to that base. We still, even though we were literally like co-located with it, we were not international level cleared to go there. So if we ever needed to drive past the property, we had to take a roundabout way. If the person had one of us kids in there, we'd never drive past Golden Era Productions, because God forbid we saw the property. And I remember once somebody just drove us through there, and we were all like terrified, like, oh, we're going to get in trouble. We shouldn't be looking at this. Like, this was our mindset where we're there. We're like, it's very freaking weird, but this is how we were. So some of these other older kids are now being gotten through their security clearances so they can go and work there. About 15 years old, they're going to graduate, and they go and start working there. But now I'm 15. But the reason they couldn't send me there is my father still had these visitation rights to me. Like I'm 15. Per the divorce decree, he's supposed to see me 2 weeks a year. And that's a problem for me to now work at that international base. So I was pulled in by security and said, hey, you need to follow suit with the rest of everyone else and get on board with what's going on. You need to handle your father. When you're going to go and visit him for the summer. And we had a trip. We were going to drive up to Alaska and camp and all this stuff. It was a lot of fun. But I need to deal with him so he understands that I'm not going to visit him anymore. And that was what security informed me I had to do. Which he wasn't in bad standing with Scientology at the time. He definitely is now, but he at the time he was it was considered like a nuisance, or what Scientology refers to as an external influence. My father would potentially influence my thoughts. I have connection to somebody in the outside world. If I'm up at that property working at the international base, it's a point of infiltration, which they were scared of. So I couldn't. And at this point now, I'm, for the last 5.5 years, I am literally being groomed to be a Sea Org member when I grow up. There was never an option on like, do you want to do this when you grow up? It was like, you will do this. Like there was no one ever sat down with us and said, what do you want to be when you want to grow up? I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a firefighter. You know, no, we were all going to be Sea Org members. There was no other options. If you had an aspiration, you had to figure out how that worked with respect to being a Sea Org member. Either that or you had to give it up. The same as when we were down in LA, but now we're just at this other property. The only time we saw our parents would be on the weekends. Sometimes they would come out and help on renovations on Saturday, or we would see them on Sunday.
Just so that the Sea Org members at the base could spend more time on post.
I think that it's so that they could spend more time on post. They could have to commute down to LA less. Of course, when you had all those kids in LA that weren't being visited by their parents, that was creating like problems with those kids. And then it would then affect the parents. But ultimately, it would affect them not to the point of them needing to do something with their kid, but it's a distraction from the work environment. And that is always what they default to. The only reason why that whole property happened is because Justin Sterling and Jenna's mom, Biddy, wanted to be closer to her kids and had enough leverage in order to make that happen. Like it would have never happened if that woman didn't demand that it happen. And she was in an executive position as such to like a little bit of quid pro quo, like, hey, I'm working my ass off and, you know, never around or anything. And I'm doing these great things for Scientology. I need this or I'm fucking out of here. And I think that that's more or less my understanding is she demanded that it happen. So, but looking at Biddy, she was brought up as a young child on the Apollo ship with Hubbard. She didn't receive a formal education. The other people, like Janice Grady was part of this, who's also kind of in the same situation as a young kid. She was no different than us. They didn't receive formal schooling. So it doesn't seem odd to Scientology parents who are themselves children in the Sea organization to not have their children receive a normal education because they never did. So I think there's a bit of like historical like repetition of what's going on with why that lack of education kind of persisted on. In addition to that, Hubbard has very strict guidance on what he wants these Scientology children referred to as cadets actually educated on. All of his stuff is, of course, what he wants the focus to be, but he would say you're going to focus on reading, writing. Oh, look, it's doing the thing. Hey, reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Hey, it's letting us both do it finally.
Finally, got the new app. Got the new Apple updates. Like, yeah. Anyway, so the reading, writing, and arithmetic. So it's supposed to have a 10,000 word vocabulary, be able to write swiftly, legibly, and elegantly, and then be able to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division to include degrees, minutes, and seconds. And that is literally like a 5th grade level education, but a little bit better at reading. So when you like reading, writing, and arithmetic is very, very basic mathematics. It's not complex mathematics. It's not percentages. It's not even anyway, it's so the whole focus on us was to make us kind of reliant on the organization. And it was even at a certain point later told to me, what are you going to do with your life? You don't have any other education. What are you going to do? You need to stay here. So anyway, kind of backing up a little bit. My contemporaries were now graduating to go and work at Golden Era Productions and the international base. And I wasn't allowed to because I had to deal with this fact that I was supposed to see my father and I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to be an adult enough to not do that anymore as a 15-year-old. So they sent me out to, they didn't send me out. They had to let me go by law to go on this trip with him. And while I was there, I was just stressing this the entire time. My father is not the easiest person to talk to. He's very explosive. It's like his problems are the most important problems kind of thing. So it's not like you can go to your dad and confide, hey, Dad, this is what's going on. I know it's going to be a blow up. So I bring it up, and of course, it's a blow up. And I don't know what to do. And my um, my stepmom ends up kind of pulling me aside. This is a different woman than the one that my current stepmom. She's wonderful. Luann is not the woman that my father left my mother for. He's now gotten remarried, and I have a half sister, and it's a much better relationship in that regard. But she kind of pulled me aside and said, just talk to me, which he could never do. And we went on a long walk, and I had never had either my father or my mother ever inquire as to how I'm doing. And my stepmother did. And she asked me just like, hey, just talking to me, like, a normal person would want to talk to their kid. And I told her, like, I am terrified of not being smart. I do not have an education. I struggled before I was in Scientology, and now I'm just like older and I have the same issues that have never been resolved. What do I do? And to me, the answer to this is very obvious now that I'm a father, but at the time, like, I was stuck in this group and had no idea how I could get out of it. And she said, well, would you consider coming and living with us? And I had two emotions occur at the time. It was complete fear, because I would be leaving the Sea organization, and that would mean I would be a suppressive person and would never see my mother again. And then also like a feeling of actually belonging to a family and not having to just be in this like communal living situation. So I told her I would like to do that. And, but I wanted to be able to talk to my mother, Rosemary. So I need to go back and do the process to leave in the way that Scientology lets you leave. It's a process called routing out. It means Scientology does everything on these routing forms. It's like you go to person to person to person, and these people are all supposed to check out these different things. And for that, the long and the short of it is, they are going to interrogate you on that security checking to find out anything that you have done wrong that they can use as blackmail against you before you would leave. And I would rather go through that and leave in hopes that I could then see Rosemary again than just to never go back. Which I realized the stupidity of this looking back. I was 15 years old. I was 15 years old, not being educated, and in situations that we were being basically labor trafficked as kids. Even if I thought it was kind of fun at the time, we were being made to do labor because they were too stingy to actually have contractors just build the place. They could have had the thing done in like 6 months if they would have just paid for it. But they were using like recycled crap stuff that like Lowe's was throwing away, that we would like, as opposed to a sheet of drywall, we're using little chunks of drywall and putting them together and trying to, anyway, we became very resourceful. But this is the sort of penny pinching bullshit that they don't care about their staff members. And I'm so indoctrinated into it, I'm terrified to leave. But I want to. Like, I have this picture in my mind of like, I want to finish high school. I really wanted to join the military. I wanted to fly a helicopter when I grew up. At the time, I really had this picture in my mind of being an Apache pilot when I grew up. Now I've become more intelligent. I'm a much better aviator now, and I'm actually a Chinook pilot, not an Apache pilot, which that joke's only funny if you are either one or the other. But at the time, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fucking leave that place. When we were there, it was the same kind of honeymoon situation with our parents. We weren't allowed to complain to our parents if we didn't like something. Like, we would get in trouble for that. It was frowned upon. We were supposed to be supporting our parents in everything that they did. So we're supposed to keep our complaints to ourselves, and that we never had a good relationship in that way. So when I went back on the timeline I was supposed to go back on. I arrived back there, and Rosemary picked me up from the airport, and she drove me back. And I just told her, I'm like, Mom, I want to leave. I want to get an education. I want to have my own life. I don't want to do this. And she's like, okay. And she brought me back to the ranch, the International Ranch, which is on the other side of the Saboba Indian Reservation, about 15 minutes away from Golden Era Productions. Dropped me off, and I've asked her now, I'm like, what were you told by security and by the the human resources people, we refer to the Hubbard Communications Office, or HCO, that handles staff problems. Like, what were you told? And they said, well, you were working for Ronnie Miscavige, and it's important that she continued to do that job because she was his assistant at the time, and that they would take care of me. They would make sure that I'm handled. They would handle me, and for her not to worry about it. So she was completely hands off at that point. So she dropped me back off. I was brought back in, and I was informed that you're going to get a security check when we have time to do it. You are not a priority. If you work, you will get paid and you will have a place to sleep. If you do not, you are going to be put in pig's berthing, and which is like you're sleeping like in a shed or something with nothing. I was put under security watch. When you are a Sea Org member that wants to leave, and this was the same for children, you are isolated from other Sea Org members. So even in this environment where it's like, kind of 1984, where everyone is like a snitch culture, they'll tell on anybody else. You are not allowed to expressly say the words, I don't want to be here and I want to leave. It's one of the cardinal sins that you can do there. It is considered a suppressive act to say that you do not want to be there, to voice that a discontent that you don't want to be there. You could immediately get kicked out of the organization and have nothing at that point. So I was not allowed to communicate with everybody, and I was isolated from all of the other kids. I was kept under watch by security guards, and I was made to do heavy manual labor and then being security checked on and off. And I tried to endure this as long as possible. They were also putting me again through that rundown, which is the whole thing of like, you must want to leave because you're exteriorizing from your body, and we're going to handle that. So they're putting me through this process, and they're asking me the questions are like, recall a time or go in, went in, can't get in, kicked out of spaces, being trapped, forced in, pulled in, pushed in, and anything that reads on that lie detector, they say, recall a time you were being trapped. And I'm like, well, I would like to fucking leave. So this was going on and on and on. And from the point I was a little over 15 years old, so I was probably 15 and a half, to the point that I was about 17 and a half, within the next 6 months, I was going to be turning 18 years old. I was in this situation, just probably under 2 years. And I was in that heavy manual labor, being interrogated, isolated from everyone else. But during that entire time, doing no formal education again. So again, I haven't progressed educationally from the point of a 10-year-old kid that was struggling in the 5th grade. And now I'm 17 and a half years old. I got in really, really good shape because I was literally pickaxing and digging trenches and doing all this stuff. I never get a tan. I'm the pastiest of pasty white boys. I just burn, and eventually freckles start holding hands. And that's the only tan I get. It's horrible. But it was just working in the hot California sun. And after 2 years, I was about to turn 18. And my father would write me letters, and I would be having to clean the galley area, the area where all the kids would eat after all the kids left, and the adults would sit in there and read aloud my father's letters and laugh at them, like while I can hear them doing it. It was shitty. But at a certain point, I ended up, there was another girl that was in a similar situation. Her name's Samantha. Her father used to be John Travolta's auditor when he worked at Celebrity Center and worked directly with Travolta and was kind of family friend. Samantha was up there at this property as well. Her father ended up leaving about the same time that I was going through all this, and Samantha wasn't sure if she wanted to leave or not leave. So she was kind of in the same situation I was. So the two of us ended up, kind of having a thing for one another, which in the Sea organization, there's no such thing as dating or any of that stuff. We just quite literally kind of fell in love. And I decided I'm 17 years old. I have nothing to do. I have nothing else to do other than to agree to stay here. And I don't know what my life's going to be if I don't do this. So at that point, after a very, very long indoctrination at that international ranch, I decided to go all in and try to be a Sea Org member and to see if I could make a life with this girl. And so I had been at that ranch property for the better part of 5 years, 5.5 years, 2 of which I was more or less a prisoner. And I was then made to be a staff member at that ranch, and eventually gotten through these international clearances before I was then posted at Golden Era Productions. Megan and I did a video several weeks ago on her channel where
you mean Laura FM?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I knew her as Megan Anderson, but it's Laura. So Laura FM and I, if you guys haven't seen this, it's worth, you can either watch it on my channel or hers. If you watch it on hers, go and subscribe to her. She deserves it. We had a very uncomfortable conversation that was very important for both of us, but I think it was important for her so that she could voice her frustrations with me, and me so that I could do right by somebody who saw me as part of the problem, because I'm about 10 years older than her. And she remembers me right as I was kind of coming off of this indoctrination wagon and like now going to try to be a Sea Org member. And like, I was just drinking the Kool-Aid at that point and trying to go all in on being a Sea Org member and trying to then enforce rules and all this sort of stuff. And she didn't have a great remembrance of me. And we sat down and talked through a lot of it. And it was hard. It was very hard for me to sit through. And I felt factually, after talking about all that, it was extremely introspective, and it kind of left me depressed because it's hard to look at yourself and realize that you might be somebody else's point of pain. And I had to confront that. And ultimately I felt better about it. And I'm glad that we had that talk, but it was pretty raw. So if anyone's here and they like some good high quality real life drama, there is a good video where we're taking the time to talk and heal and do that, but it was not easy. But that is kind of the person that I kind of started out at, and the person that I slowly became after being there. And I'm not trying to push my my responsibilities for any of my interactions with anyone else off on this organization. I'm just trying to lay in the mindset of where kids, when you're during this entire time, there's no contact with the external world. There's no TV. There's no letters. There's no magazines. That you might just have some music that you listen to, but you are very, very isolated. And this is the life of what exists for children. That's parents join Scientology when they were very young and are then indoctrinated into this, with their parents basically being absentee their entire childhood and being raised by the organization. And your parent it's almost like if you go and visit a family member that you don't see often, and it's like, oh, I love Uncle whoever. And that's almost who you're like, you don't know your parents. Like, you don't have those, like, your parents aren't responsible for your day to day. They don't put you to bed. They don't deal with you when you're sick. They don't check on you educationally. No one had birds and the bees conversations. We learned this shit by being interrogated while we were at this ranch. And it was horrible. Like, like kind of fumbling through it, and we're being made to write up our crimes and like, did you touch yourself inappropriately? And like, adults are interrogating this and then exposing what you answer to other kids. And it sucked. So what started out as the ranch, which was like, hey, we're out of LA, we're doing these renovations, turned into a total and utter shit show. And that's kind of how it was around the time I was then leaving the ranch to go and work at this other property. During the time that kids are young, and I started into this when I was about 10 years old, younger kids like Jenna, Laura, and others were in this from the age of like literally just out of diapers. Like, a lot of kids still wet in the bed. This is how, like, we had kids that were like 4, 5, 6 years old that, there was about 80 of us there at one point. I remembered, and I know that it's not uncommon for kids to wet the bed, but the amount of bedwetters that we had out of the kids that were there was as a percentage wise, very, very high. And a lot of it extended up into their like, preteens to teens and all this sort of stuff. I remember during the day is a hot California sun. And if you wet your bed, you had to strip your bed. And I never had this problem, but I had a friend who was the same age as me that he still did when he was like 15. You'd have to strip your bed, turn it all in to get washed, take your mattress, pull it off the bed, pull it outside so it can dry in the sun. There would be like dozens and dozens of mattresses outside every day, just drying in the sun because kids wet in their beds. And that's just an example of how, like, the kids are left to be raised by this organization. And then you wonder why we're having problems with attachment issues with our parents. Like, because the only person you can attach to as a kid for your safety is this organization or the adults that are put in charge of you. It's not great.
Why is it that I only hear from like about or from like, I don't know, 3, 4, or 5 kids of all these 90 kids? Like there's you, Sterling, Jenna, Laura. Who else?
There are a lot. I think that I never thought that I would. I mean, there's a lot of shame connected with what I just talked about, and I'm not like now I'm an army officer that flies helicopters and teaches people to fly and go to combat. Like now I'm talking about the fact that I was like undereducated until I'm at this advanced point in my life. I think that people are scared to speak out, or they want to put it behind them so much and move on, that we literally like compartmentalize off what happened in our life and try to move past it and like put it all behind us. But I remember when I finally left many, many years later and I was 27, I was 27 years old. I'd never had a drop of alcohol. Had only like dated one girl who I got married to when she was 16 and I was 18. Like I didn't have a normal childhood and upbringing. I never made mistakes as a teenager or in my 20s. And then I joined the army and had to make a bunch of mistakes really fast. So I think for a lot of the kids that left, and I'm guessing Catherine Spolino, she wrote her book. I mean, there are people starting to speak out, but I think it's a very internal, personal decision to make on if you feel like you want to dig it all up again and talk about it. For me, talking about this and kind of creating this channel, and again, I'm sorry I haven't been on recently, but I have been just slammed with work and family, but I want to keep sharing it. This is therapeutic for me to share the story so that I can kind of get it off my chest and hopefully share it so that other people like kind of see this and we can change the narrative about what's going on. But I'm hoping that there is strength in numbers. And I don't want that to sound like we're a bunch of chicken shits and we have to have like, let Aaron lead the way. But I got to give you some kudos. Like there were the original people kind of doing the videos. There were just a few of you. And then Aaron, you really doubled down on this and got a huge following and then started being on national programs and like, and then you've done something very unique, which you were the guy that talked me into doing this. You're like, hey, you're going to share these stories. You might as well just make your own channel, man. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll make that as a repository for the stories about my mom. And then I got into it. I'm like, you know what? I haven't had anyone to talk about this shit for 20 years since I've been gone. And a lot of this stuff happened 30 or 40 years ago. Like I need to talk about it. And I'm hoping that other people see like, hey, it's okay to come forward and talk about it. Like if anyone judges me about this, frankly, I don't give a crap. I mean, I'm kind of established in my life. And I think at this point, most of us that are out, we have something else to hang our hat on to say, this is what I now do. But I need to talk about what happened then so that we can have a bit of a healing that occurs. And then also like kind of shine some light on the nasty. Maybe that'll help, kind of sanitize it a little bit. But for Scientology to have like tax exempt status and all this sort of shit, when it is all focused on making money and focused on work. Never in any of I forced myself to listen to Apostate Alex's, the recording that he had on his channel of the IAS event. I listened to it on 2x speed just to give myself a dose of the psycho that had occurred in all of that stuff, just to listen to all of that. Two main things came out at me. One, all of their successes around the world are all in third world countries because none of the civilized countries give a shit about them anymore. So it's like, they're down like hiding out in Brazil and all this, and all their freedom medal winners are in these abstract locations.
Well, and you can't verify the stories. So
correct. Yeah. It's off campus a little bit. And then another thing, there was one word that you will never find in any Scientology pamphlet, propaganda, or video. And that's the word family. You will never hear it ever, ever, ever said. They do not give a shit about family. And this is like around the holidays when this IS event happens. It's like, right between, Halloween and Thanksgiving here in the United States. And we're about to get into the holiday season between Hanukkah and Christmas. And there's a bunch of stuff going on. You're never going to hear them say family. The word family, they are allergic to that word. Like it's going to kill them. It is unbelievable. But at this ranch, there was abuse that would happen. There was spanking of little kids. And there was also, I know of one particular kid that was in his teens who would be sneaking into other kids' rooms at night and touching them. And when the organization found out about this, I only knew about this because my ex-wife was one of the people that had to deal with this. But when the organization found out about that, their solution was to just get rid of him and send him off that property. But there was nothing done on any of the people that were victimized other than to like have them write up their overts and withholds or focus on what they were doing as victims to pull that sort of thing in. So the mentality in Scientology, like I can't overstate enough for the people that watch this. You don't need to elaborate or overemphasize or lie about any of these stories. They don't need embellishment. They are there is plenty to embellish on, just telling the details about it. So one thing I have not found is untruth in the stories that are being shared. And there's just got to be an emphasis about that. Again, going full circle, we have to focus on these three areas where Scientology has to be held accountable: elder abuse, child abuse, labor trafficking, and that labor trafficking applying to the other two as well.
Yeah.
So
Mike, let me ask you this. A lot of times in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, how would someone who's still inside the bubble respond, even just defensively respond to some of these things? And if someone who was still in the bubble came to you and said, none of this matters because they got rid of the cadet orgs, what would you say to them?
So I'd ask them if they have children. I would ask them, do they think that that's true because of their belief in Scientology, and then their belief that they're going to come back and this life is unimportant to them because they're going to live for billions of years and do this mission for L. Ron Hubbard? I would ask them, what are you missing out on? What have you given up that you're not seeing? What are you not having that you're giving up for Scientology? Are you giving up that time with your child? Are you giving up the meaningful moments that you'll never get back? Are you missing the opportunity to know a family member before they're gone? And then you're going to realize later that all of this is bullshit, and now that person's gone and you're never going to have that time back with them. It's a very personal decision when somebody has to come out and actually say, hey, everything that I've believed my entire life is a lie. Because the two things people really, really hate to be wrong about is wasting their money and wasting their time. And those are the two things that Scientology will completely 100% monopolize. So I think that that's part of the problem, is people are so scared to realize that they are full of shit and they've been conned. They've wasted their time and their money and done something that they then have to face their own internal struggle on, like, what am I responsible for? Who have I affected negatively? And looking at that, I can tell you, as that conversation that I had with Laura, that was not fun. Like, it was important that I did it, and I feel better now, but I didn't feel better the next day. I felt better that she felt better, but I didn't feel good at all. And I think that the people that refuse to leave, I think that is what they're scared of. They're scared of what's going on in their head, and to be honest with themselves about it.
Yeah. I still think that people who are inside the bubble somehow allow themselves to believe that anything that's wrong at any echelon of management and at any time in the last 40 years is only because some big bad SP made it that way, and David Miscavige hadn't yet come along to spot the SP and declare them and make it all right. I know that I, as a good little staff member and Sea Org member growing up in Scientology, believed that the international base was this utopia where no one had to run around worrying about stats Thursday before 2. No one had to deal with public. There were no flaps. There were no urgent things. Everything was just sane and everything was wonderful. And that belief is one of the things that kept me going as a good little staff member and a Sea Org member, that anything that was wrong is just something David Miscavige doesn't know about yet. What was your view as someone who not only grew up there as a kid, but then worked there as a young adult?
I was just like, when I flipped that switch, like, I'm going to stay and I'm 100% in, it was all of this was happening kind of around the time when we're out at the ranch of the Eli Lilly campaigns against Time Magazine. All this sort of stuff was spooling up. The tax exempt status of Scientology had been regained with the big IAS event. Like all of this is happening while I'm a kid that's trapped here at this ranch. And I see Scientology being all I had seen is Scientology propaganda. And I was like, I'm wrong for having to leave or wanting to leave. And I just decided I'm all in. So when I decided to dedicate myself again, and they made me sign another Sierra contract. So I guess that makes me on the hook for like 2 billion years if I do the math right. I did like, I think just under 10. So anyway, I'm not good at math. So that's what you get. So at that point, I was so indoctrinated that I would believe it and I would be right there. Like when the German film crews, I've been corresponding with a guy that was the guy that, that had one of the German film crews that came out to that property. I'm the year after I got out of this ranch, I was then working there. I was one of the people that were taking pictures of the film crew standing with the PIs and with OSA, taking pictures of them as they're trying to find out about that RPF that was out there and Vipka Hansen and all that. I am in those photos. I'll send them to you. They're hilarious. I'm sitting there like a dickhead with just taking photos, like no big deal. Here's Mike. I am one of the guys that's on the Scientology side of that.
Is that the one where they drove in like the backhoe to keep them from backing their car out of there?
Yep. I am in the video. I'm the kid. I'm the kid sitting there taking photos in the khaki pants.
Oh my goodness.
We were then following them with PIs and like, you know, as they were around this property. And I was thinking like I was told at the time that they were there to harass the kids and they were really trying to find out about the RPF. And I didn't even know that. But I was indoctrinated to the point of like, now I'm on the other side and working for OSA and the port captain's office and all of that in order to keep us safe from the bad SPs.
Wow.
So if I find myself in a POW situation as now a service member, I've proven I can last 2 years before I completely give up. I think I can do better next time.
Wow. Hey, I know you've got a hard stop in about 7 minutes. Let's run. I got some of these super chats start and some regular things start as well. Sandra Hartley, thank you very much. John C says, wow, I know Beckett Wells also. He was an electrician at Gold. What happened to him and where is he now?
I think he's out. He's still kind of a Scientologist. He's married, I think, and married with a kid. And I don't know where he lives exactly. I haven't talked to him since I was at the Ent base, but I have very, very fond memories of Beckett. He's one of my favorite people.
He is one of the only Sea Org members I know who seemed to have a physical disability. He walks. He has
a little limp.
Did he have an accident or was he born that way?
I'm not sure. I never asked him. I didn't want to ask.
Okay, but you knew. Okay, but did you know him as a young person?
He was like 14 years old when I was 7 or 8. So he's a little older than I am. So when you're 7 or 8 years old, a 14-year-old's like way older than you.
But he already walked like that?
I can't remember back then, but I know when I was at the base, he definitely did. He kind of has this little, like, it almost looks like a cool guy walk, but he has a definite hip limp or something. Yeah.
Okay. Blow drill. This is Dylan. My aunt was a course supervisor. The kids around the orgs would get used as training dummies, which most people of us were happy to do at the time. Most of us were happy to do at the time.
Yeah, we'd have to sit there and do that. I never had to do that, but I did my fair share of TRs, that's for sure.
Yeah. Quirkalopagus. Oh, I love that name. Thank you for your courage and huge, beautiful heart.
Thank you.
That's to you. That's on your channel. Red Tar for me, Lori Lynn. Kids deserve love and a safe space. Yeah,
that's true. They do.
Main house, right? And, this is about the what if it was a whole planet video. That video, but in actuality, what they did on the RPF, the frozen lake dunks, etc. Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Abigail, Aaron, did you see my email with the link to the live stream Uncivil Law did to Leah Remini's case update? I did see that. It's a long video. I think you sent me the timestamps as well. And I have that on my list of things to take a look at. I appreciate that, Abigail. Girl on a Mission. Thank you very much. Actually, Girl on a Mission. I think you actually meant to follow this up with a real comment, meaning you meant to put a comment in there and it didn't work. But anyway, I didn't see the follow-up. Okay, Louis Repetto, what needs did you have that they met in order to handle you? So this is to handle you to stay. But I guess it took 2 years. So did they really handle you or did they just win the war of attrition?
I think it was the war of attrition in that I was almost 18 And like, what are you going to do at 18 with no education? So it's sort of like, hey, what are you going to do now, dumbass? And the guilt of stupidity is a pretty hard guilt. And that's how I felt at the time. I think I've gotten past that now. And I think I've earned my keep in this world. But at the time, I guess I was just scared that I wouldn't amount to anything. And the whole, like, you're going to be a failure in life is kind of what was being pushed on me about it. There's a video that's probably going to come out in the next week or two, that I did with the Lighthouse Project, Christy Gordon and Miriam. And we go into a lot of details on this. And actually, we get into the whole divorce and disconnection. And we show a lot of documents, including marriage certificates, documents from OSA, like the letters from my family. So that's going to be something that everyone should look out for. It's going to be fun when they get it done. I'll make sure we publish it everywhere.
Wow. All right, Lori Plantamuro. As a Christian black sheep child, I understand what you're going through. Have strength and stay real. You're helping people all over the world in all regions.
Thank you.
It's very nice.
I appreciate that.
Sarah S. Mike and Aaron, thank you both for your courage. In my experience, talking about the sources of shame can release it. I hope that is becoming true for you. Yes, indeed.
Feels better than keeping
I actually have
it
a question. I actually have a question for you on this subject.
Okay.
It is my opinion that people who use YouTube, the platform, as an opportunity to speak publicly about their own trauma, that is not an easy thing to do. It's also not an easy thing to do over and over and over again. And, you know, I've commented publicly on the fact that it's almost a decision I've made. You know, I do so many videos. Almost none of my videos are talking about myself. And therefore, it's actually very hard for me to get burnt out, because talking about Scientology in general, to me, is not emotionally exhausting. Talking about myself is. What do you think about that?
So I learned to compartmentalize very, very well. And that, so I've noticed you are in better communication or contact with your emotions than I am. And I'm not trying to say that you getting emotional.
You mean because I break down and cry at the drop of a hat?
Yes, and I can't, like, I quite literally can't. I'm going to be honest with you. I compartmentalize so much. So for me, there's so many things I haven't talked about here, and covering them multiple times for me, and I'm just different in that way. It helps to desensitize it, because I'm pulling it out a little bit, and then I'll get hit with a flood of emotions, and I'll get, like, you know, a little teary-eyed about something. I'll take a deep breath, and then I soldier up again and kind of go on and just stick it back in its hole. For me, this is an opportunity to kind of dig it out and do something with it, which I have not done, and I need to. So I hope to be at the point where I'm in, you know, I'm not emotionless, but I'm not, I compartmentalize way better than I should, and to a point that it's unhealthy for me. So this feels good. It's not easy. And at the end of this, I'm going to be exhausted. I'm probably going to sleep well tonight, and I'm going to have a bunch of fucking weird dreams about the ranch. But I'll get up tomorrow and I'll go to work, and I'll just keep on keeping on.
Yeah, that's great. Because it did dawn on me recently that I'm encouraging everyone to do these videos, but a lot of the people who do the videos are talking about their own trauma over and over and over and over again. And I'm like, well, shit, that's not exactly what I'm doing. And I don't know. Sometimes I question whether it's wise to encourage people to do all the videos if that's what they're going to do, because that's not what I'm doing. And anyway, I figured I'd ask you about that. Like,
I think, yeah, it's different for everybody. And for me, there's the benefit of talking about it, which is a personal benefit. But it also feels like, you know, when you do something, you're like, that made a difference. And I bet you felt that way when you came back from covering the stuff in LA with the Jane Does. You're like, that made a difference, me sharing something, and it was hard to do. And I'm not trying to equate those two things, but for me sharing this, I'm like, if somebody else can see, you know what, I got something out of that, I hope that that happens too. But I do feel better when I talk about it. And I don't want to do this as like, I'm a big victim, like, look at me and all this, but I do want to shed light on the fact, like, I'm one of many people that is jacked up in my own way, but I am not a uniqueness. And like my mother and her story, she spoke out, and she's not unique. She's unique in that she's sharing it, and she wants to shed light on it to help other people. And that's great. But this needs to, like, people sharing more and more of this. Before, there was only a couple people that were out bitching about it. Now there's more and more. So I think it's going to become exponential. Hopefully it does. And we actually see real, like, public opinion changed is what I'd really like to see.
That'll be the what is it? The subtext. SPTV. We're all out here bitching about it.
Nattering.
Guys, if you're not yet subscribed to Mike Brown's YouTube channel, you can find him at Mike Brown. Mike Brown 101 is how YouTube really likes to find that channel. All right, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us this afternoon. Thank you, as always, to everyone who watches until the very end, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe